All right, so for more on this increasing reliance on social grants, we are joined by the Institute for Economic Justice's Labour and Social Security Senior Researcher, Kelle Howson, and Pay the Grants, Alfred Moyo. I'd like to welcome both of you. Thank you so much for your time and for participating in this very important discussion this evening. And perhaps let's begin with you, Kelle. I mean, we are seeing those statistics there coming from the General Household Survey, speaking about how over 50% of households in this country receive at least one form of social grant, making grants the second most important source of income within our households. How do you think we fare in relation to other third world countries when it comes to the dependency on social grants?
Sure. So South Africa is an upper middle income country based on our GDP, which means we're ranked actually among the more wealthy countries, not necessarily the lowest income countries that we are often compared to. But amongst upper middle income countries, South Africa actually spends or has a lower coverage in terms of social protection as a percentage of the population. So the average amongst our peer countries is about 71%. South Africa has about 65% coverage. And when you put that in the context of the fact that, again, amongst upper middle income countries, South Africa has a much, much higher degree of income poverty and inequality. In fact, we top upper middle income countries in terms of income poverty and inequality. Our social grant coverage is not high enough. And that might be a kind of counterintuitive claim, given that we are seeing such high proportions of households who have social grants as their primary source of income. But that's actually a function of the extent of our crisis of economic exclusion. It's not an indicator that social grant coverage is too high.
Perhaps, General Moyo, bringing you in there, when Kelle speaks about our social grant coverage not being high enough, we are seeing an increase in poverty within our country, a high unemployment rate, a lot of inequality in many pockets of our society. Do you think that we are doing enough in terms of putting out social grants, especially for those populations that solely rely on these grants?
Good evening, and good evening to the viewers at home. I think the state or the government is not doing enough. First and foremost, we should also maybe acknowledge and remember that the grants is not a political favor. It is an obligation of the state, a constitutional obligation of the state to make sure that no one goes to bed hungry. But with the extreme poverty that the people that are poor and marginalized are being subjected to, we don't think that the state is doing enough in terms of the coverage of the marginalized and the poor communities. More exclusions to those that are legitimate to qualify for those grants are being excluded. And we are seeing that more and more people are being subjected to the extreme poverty levels, and the extreme inequality gap is widening.
So, Kelle, then the reliance on social grants, what's its influence on overall economic growth and productivity in our country?
Social grants have been declining in terms of their adequacy over a number of years because of the austerity paradigm in our fiscal policy. So the government hasn't been increasing social grant values sufficiently, particularly for the child support grant and the social relief of distress grant, which both are well below the food poverty line. So they don't provide enough for people to meet their basic food needs. So that is a serious issue in terms of the number of people that are locked out of the economy. Unemployment is not the fault of the people who find themselves without work. It's the fault of macroeconomic policy that has failed to create enough jobs in South Africa. And so, as Comrade Moyo says, Social grants are a right. They're a constitutional right. If you are unable to meet your basic needs, you are entitled to support from the government to help you do so. And that support simply is not adequate at the moment.
And Moyo, do you think there's any long-term implications of a large portion of our country depending on social grants? Could there be a cycle of dependency that is bred over time?
I think with the 30 years failed state of providing or assisting to provide jobs, I think that's the first blame to be pointed at. But with this current juncture that we are facing, with the austerity that the Comrade Kelle pointed out, and the situation which communities on the ground are facing, I think the grants are the must and our only way that at least community can at least survive for a day or two, even though it's not enough. But the grants, I think the state should be doing more in terms of improving those grants, as Comrade Kelle indicated, that the child grants have never been improved. The social distress of relief have never been improved for the past 5 years. Even now, it's still under a lower poverty line. So we believe that the grant is the only way for now, even if the state have been making promises of creating jobs, have failed beyond reasonable doubt up to so far.
And you, Kelle, do you think that there's a dependency, especially on the influence of labor in people actively going out to look for whatever scarcity of jobs that may exist out there?
There's quite a common perception that we have what is often referred to as a dependency syndrome in South Africa, where people are essentially content to rely on grants or handouts, as they're sometimes called, from the government, rather than going out and searching for jobs. And that has been consistently disproven by the research over and over again. Rigorous evidence shows that people want to work, they want to improve their livelihoods, and when given the opportunity, that's exactly what they do. And social grants have been shown to, even when they're inadequate, even when they're below the food poverty line and they don't cover basic needs, people still use those grants to try and build sustainable livelihoods over time. For example, the SRD grant increases the likelihood that a recipient will go out and search for a job, and it increases the likelihood that they'll enter into employment in the short term. So what that shows is that giving people social grants, giving them that foundation to meet their very basic needs, unlocks their ability and potential to contribute to the economy and to improve their situation over time. So it's not true that grants create dependency. In fact, the opposite is true. Grants help people get out of a poverty trap. But there is an important caveat to this, which is that restrictive means testing can undermine the growth-creating potential of social grants and the potential of social grants to contribute to employment creation, because if your access to a social grant is dependent on having only a very, very low level of income into your bank account, as is the case with the SRD grant, there's then a disincentive to undertake other income generating activities, because it might mean that your access to social grants is limited. So there needs to be a more inclusive design to ensure that social grants do contribute to job creation and livelihood improvement.
And Moyo, what's your take on that, and that more inclusive design that could be put forward in people saying, I'm not going to go out and look for a job because it could lower then the risks of me continuing with this SRD grant, and this really is my base?
Yeah, maybe let us get this point straight. People cannot actually like to receive the 370 insult for a month that can not even sustain them for a week, rather than choosing a job. But the jobs are not there. Simply, the state have failed, as I've indicated, that the state have failed beyond reasonable doubt for the past 30 years to create jobs or to assist creating jobs. So the only way the state have been proving is to push this privatization of jobs into the private sector. And the private sector have also proven beyond reasonable doubt that it cannot create jobs. But the private sector is about profiteering from the misery of the poor and the marginalized. So the state, with failing to create jobs, it cannot therefore try to come up with a quick solution, which have failed to work even before, which is what they are now trying to come up with this so-called a job-seeking grant. It cannot work because where people will go to look for those jobs, there can't be anywhere where jobs can be created at this juncture. So the only solution is to improve the grants and make sure that the universal basic income guarantee is being implemented very soon, so that at least it can try to supplement the little that the minority that are privileged to have some employment can at least supplement those salaries. And those that are unemployed, at least they can try to cover the gap of inequality that is widening. Currently, we are in a skyrocketing unemployment level, which cannot be easily covered or cannot be easily resolved. So the job-seeking grant is not a solution, but the improvement of the existing grants and making sure that we advance in a speedily way to the universal basic income guarantee. That's the only solution that the government can come up with. But with the austerity measures that we are still subjected to, the extreme living conditions and a cost of living that the poor and the marginalized are still subjected to, there is no easy solution in this juncture.
And I wanted you to expand on some of those alternative measures and alternative welfare solutions that we could give, but you've extensively put out in terms of that universal grant guarantee. Perhaps, Kelle, maybe if we benchmark ourselves against other countries that have been able to move away from a great dependency on social grants and create not only just jobs for people, but other alternatives. Are there countries that we could look to and take lessons from?
I think that there needs to be a multi-pronged strategy. And that's what, it's difficult to compare the South African situation to countries with high levels of employment and low levels of unemployment. But if you look at the Nordic model, for instance, very well established welfare states, we can see that essentially in those countries, 100% of the population is covered by the social safety net. So if you find yourself unemployed, you will have access to social protection. And for vulnerable populations, there is adequate, decent social protection coverage. So that includes children, older persons, right. Maternity benefits, disability benefits, etc. So South Africa needs to move towards a model of ensuring a comprehensive social safety net, which covers 100% of the population, and that can be achieved through the improvement of the social relief of distress grant into a universal basic income grant, because the situation at the moment is that the majority of working age, able-bodied adults do not have access to social protection, despite the introduction of the social relief of distress grant. It only reaches about half of the population who should be eligible for it and who are in need of it.
All right. Well, it certainly is a long way to go for South Africans and to achieve that comprehensive social security net. Thank you so much to both of you, Kelle Howson and General Alfred Moyo of the #PayTheGrants, joining us there on that conversation about the grants and the dependency that we are seeing in South Africa. Thank you so much for your time.